Hey, Steve, can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
So the other day we were talking about Interstellar, so I had to watch it again. So do you have daughters?
I have one daughter, one son.
Okay. So and I'm sure it applies to sons as well, but particularly daughters, because Matthew McConaughey's character, there was 2 times in the movie where you're like, you just want to give your daughter a hug. The first time is the gal who plays Murph as a 10-year-old. I forget her name, but Mackenzie Foy, I think. But anyway, she plays Murph. She plays his daughter. He's like, hey, I've got to go on this mission. I'm going to go into space. And she doesn't want him to go. And hopefully I'm not giving anybody any spoilers. But he goes, Murph, please don't make me go without you, saying bye, say you love me, this and that. And he has to leave. And then he drives off and she chases him, but she doesn't catch him in time. I'm like, So I had to go give my daughters a hug. Then there's the other scene, which is even worse, where they're at the planet that's closer to the black hole. So time on that planet goes faster, right, than somebody outside. And he gets back to the ship and he's watching all these videos come through. And there's his daughter, Murph, who was 10 when he left. And now she's like, 80 or something like that, or 90 years old. And he's aged like, a few minutes or a few days. And I got to pause it again, go hug my daughters. But I know one of the things that you're interested in is black holes and stuff. That's sort of a
side hobby. Yeah. I like figuring out what's going on there. The black hole universe has changed so much since it was predicted in 1916 that black holes existed, but the term didn't really come about until 1967.
Yeah.
And our learning about what a black hole is and the formation and everything like that's changed drastically in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, it was that Event Horizon Telescope project, right?
Yep.
I think it was Katie Bowman.
Yeah,
she led that. She's done a couple TED Talks and things like that since, but the first picture, right? Which is pretty phenomenal. So what do you think's next? I mean, we theorized it was there. Now we actually have a picture. Now what do we do?
Yeah, the funny thing is that ties Interstellar back in. Their version of what a black hole looked like, it was almost directly mapped to what Katie put together and demonstrated. It's amazing how close they looked. Black holes, we're continuing to learn. There's this now called supermassives that are supposed to be at the center of galaxies. They're billions or billions times more massive than our sun. So, we're learning so much about black holes. It's crazy.
Yeah. Have you ever seen those charts where it says, this is the size of our sun, and here's the size of some stars that we know that are out there. And it's just like, it's infinitesimal. It's so small compared to some of these massive stars, right?
Yeah, we're learning so much with all the new telescopes that are outside the Earth atmosphere on what's going on out there. It's crazy.
Yeah, what a time to live. I was thinking back, the Wright brothers first, heavier than air sustained flight was 1903 or 04, something like that. And 1969, we get a man on the moon. Yeah. So 66 years. That's like the lifetime of not even a person. And in that time, we went from, hey, let's make something fly, to a man on the moon. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, crazy.
So let's talk a little bit about SIEM. You told me you've just been through kind of a project of kind of renewing or replacing or redeciding how you're going to run SIEM and what you're doing. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when we split the company back in 2014, we migrated most of our IT operations into a managed data center, and they promised that they had a SIEM. When we started asking questions post-move, so what kind of logs are you getting? How are you evaluating those? How come it's been a year and you haven't sent us any alerts? And it turns out they really didn't have a SIEM. They had a very small IDS, IPS set of logs going into one customized alerting system, and they called it a SIEM. So
they built some kind of back-end system just to ingest these logs, and they said that was a full-on SIEM. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, that's why we didn't get any alerts of anything weird happening.
Yeah, we use grep, sed, and awk. All 3 of them. It's crazy.
Probably not. It was probably in a DOS console.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so we went through the process of trying to decide how do we want to do this. We again had migrated most of our IT to outsourcers, so it wasn't a possibility to take a standard of the market best practice of ArcSight or ESM or something like that, and
Yeah.
or QRadar, build the infrastructure and put it inside our data center. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have an on-prem data center anymore, so we took a look at what are the options. There's always as a service. There's options about sending portions of your logs out and not getting full coverage. In the end, we ended up, because we had a relationship with FireEye, we took a look at what was at the time called the Threat Analytics Platform, TAP.
Yep.
That's turned into Helix.
Helix. Yeah.
Next generation, in the cloud, SIEM, all of our logs go there today. We have we've gone from 1 billion to 2 billion logs a day that show up in Helix, and
Wow.
all the next generation machine learning rules apply to that.
I love how you just step over that from 1 billion to a couple billion now. That's even today. So let me step back. Like, I remember when we started ArcSight, I don't know, like employee 15 or something, very, very early on, pre-customer, pre-revenue, all that kind of good stuff. And I remember one of our pitches was, you guys might have, thousands of logs a day. How are you going to analyze that? We had no idea. Back then we were thinking, I don't know, maybe an IDS, maybe a firewall log. Someday we'll get to like a router. We weren't even thinking OS or anything like that back then.
Yeah, the security solution stack is double, triple, quadrupled in size. So you've got more logs coming in every day. For us, we went from 1 billion to 2 billion in the event that happened to us at the end of 2018 when we moved our data center from this managed data center infrastructure into Amazon. And our cloud visibility dramatically increased when we had VPC flow logs, but today we have 1.3 billion VPC flow logs a day going into Helix.
Wow.
And our cloud visibility back then was, we didn't have a packet capture device on the network, and so the only thing we saw was what went through the firewall.
Yeah. So when you started this search for this new SIEM solution, you were expressly looking for something that operated in the cloud?
We were not looking to manage the infrastructure. So the options there were in the cloud or, a managed service. And the feedback we got from our peers on some of the managed services was, it's really not there yet. So we took a look at the FireEye solution. I don't want to talk about any technical details behind the scenes, but it's as a service. And just making sure the logs get there is part of the struggle that you all go through when you're trying to build up your logging infrastructure. Making sure everything's there, making sure that it's parsed, and then having the rules around event correlation and significance of the IOCs being applied to the events that go in there.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mentioned earlier, my time at ArcSight, I was there for about 6.5 years. Prior to that, I was with Riptech, which was an MSSP that eventually got sold to Symantec, became Symantec's MSSP. So I kind of approached SIEM as a sort of a next step for what the MSSP was, and then the two kind of combined later on. And you see a lot of MSSPs offering SIEM or SIEM-like capabilities. But one of the things that I noticed in the early days at the MSSP was you were so dependent on the underlying infrastructure working properly. Right. So do I have the right signature set? Is the product that is my IDS, my firewall, are those devices even implemented properly? Right. And if they are implementing properly, are they logging correctly? I remember there was a lot of checkpoint back then. There's still a lot of checkpoint today, but checkpoint was certainly the big game back then. And there was checkpoint OPSEC, or you could do stuff through SNMP, or you could do it through syslog. And I don't think it was syslog NG or SNMP version 3 or anything like that back then. You had some pretty simple sets. The difference was if you went OPSEC, you had like 100+ fields that you would get. If you went traditional, let's say SNMP, I think you had like 14 or 15. And I'm messing up the numbers, but you had a lot less. So when you would say, well, let's throw this stuff in it for analysis. Oh, well, we weren't running it with OPSEC, or we weren't running it with this, or there was just so many variables that you had to get up and running. I know when we talked earlier, it's almost like security operations today it's kind of like a race car team. And you're spending so much time, balancing the tires and, adjusting the carburetor and just making sure everything's, fine-tuned working. but you never get it on the track. You're never racing. You know? Did it feel like that? I mean, you've been working with SIEM for a very long time. Did this feeling ever go away?
No. The next struggle in that and establishing that competence is making sure that what you set up continues to go, right?
Yeah.
So if you know I'm getting logs, how do you verify that? How do you automatically, with automation, check to make sure all your logs are showing there? Yeah, we've had multiple cases where, dang, those logs didn't show up all weekend. What's going on? That'll be the next level of maturity for us, is to automate detection on missing logs.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I like that, finding this something that was there and now it's not, the environmental drift thing, which is
exactly.
a big Veridon story, of course, for security instrumentation platforms. But another thing we noticed, and let me know if this was still an issue, or maybe it still is everywhere, but NTP, just getting time to be right. I mean, back then you would deal with some really slow links. We had some people in APAC that had some frame relay stuff, and there was even some X25, and there was some legacy links that existed. So things had to be batched up and sent over these links, maybe once an hour, twice a day, whatever the frequency that was correct. And you do some deduplication and some compression and some other things to make that work. But NTP always seemed to be jacked up. For whatever reason, time just was in the future by several days. It was behind by a couple hours because of different time zones. It was the wrong timestamp and everybody wasn't on GMT. And that was nightmarish, because when you try to do correlation, right? Okay, now I've got all my data. Well, I can't correlate this because it's from 5 days in the future, or this thing just is, you know,
right.
Were you still seeing that sort of, you know, someone with hands on keyboard?
For us, when we split the company, we got rid of all the on-prem data centers. The interesting aspect back then was it was such an issue that audit would have controls and go in and check your infrastructure. What's the time on these systems? Where are you getting your time from? What stratum is it? When we split, we went to a managed infrastructure. They had a common time across it. And in the end of 2018, when we went to Amazon, time is not an issue for us anymore. All our assets are in the cloud. There is no time issue anymore.
Nice. Well, that's a huge one, right? I mean, if you
Yeah.
can get past that, that's one more thing that you don't have to worry about.
When you're going into see an incident and you move the scale back 5 minutes to see what happened prior, now everything's in there. It's coordinated on time, and you can see all the real stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And are you pulling in, and share as much as you can, and don't if you can't get deeper. But I mean, we saw people pulling in physical security devices, biometric, you know, card scanners, things like that. Trying to do correlation around a use case such as, you know, Steve walked into a building in Washington, D.C., and within 5 minutes he was trying to VPN in from someplace in Southeast Asia. Does this pass the DUD test? Is that something that you guys are working on?
So that's a good question. We do have on our agenda to do more of a, quote, fusion center that combines physical and digital security.
Yeah.
We do have a common leadership on that. Jerry Archer is our CISO. He covers both physical and electronic. So that is the goal, Cyber Fusion Center, where we get all those logs in and can make behavior-based decisioning on both the physical badge and the electronic shows up from a facility or from a site perspective.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool stuff when you get to that level. I also found it to be, I guess frustrating is the best word, because generally speaking, and this isn't the true for all companies, but the physical security team reports up through a different structure than the you know, network security team, for example. And they're different people with different backgrounds, different types of educations with different focuses, right? So it's generally that they're not part of the same you know, mindset in terms of how they think about security. So you're trying to get these two groups together. And more often than not, I'll say 9 times out of 10, it's like, well, we don't even know if we have physical security logs, or if we do, we don't know where they are or who to ask about it, right?
Yes. The good news for us is we know where the logs are. Now we just got to do the integration piece.
Yeah, yeah. Is parsing them any different than parsing the you know, traditional cybersecurity stuff?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, you've got fields and you've got set expectations coming out of that. So I don't see an issue with parsing there.
No, that's good. That's good. Because I know a lot of the times for, say, critical infrastructures like PLC equipment, you know, you've got these specialized purpose-built unidirectional diodes, and you've got historians, and you've got all sorts of things that are, maybe they're running various SCADA protocols, Modbus and DNP3, and
Sure.
you've got a lot of different things to worry about. And sometimes when you get the data, it's like, what kind of format's this, right? I have no idea, and Google doesn't even know, right? You're like, what is this thing? But that doesn't seem to be the case with a lot of the modern physical stuff I found. I think they've sort of embraced this world that, hey, these things should go together, right? Which is nice. It's a nicer place to be than it was, in the past.
In the financial services industry, I think the next version of that is the fraud side, where you have usually fraud buried in the business. Did they write the right check? Did they take too much money out? And when you start to combine that with the digital equivalence on handheld phones or on your website, mapping the two different fields, the consumer fraud side with the digital attacker side, is kind of on the horizon for us as well.
That's pretty cool. Is it to the point now where does your team work very closely with the folks on the fraud side? Is it like a daily thing, a monthly, quarterly, or is, as needed?
It's as needed right now. We see lots of opportunity there because we have so much data that could provide background on where attackers are coming from, where fraudsters now are starting to come from. So we want to definitely provide input into the decision-making processes there.
Yeah. I want to step back to something you mentioned earlier. We were talking a little bit about environmental drift in terms of, because it's working today doesn't mean it's going to be working tomorrow, next week, next month. One of the issues that I hear a lot about are a lack of communication within sort of the broader IT team. So perhaps security isn't told when the infrastructure team makes an update, and maybe there's a proxy server that's put in place, and now that proxy server is stopping all your syslog messages that used to be feeding into your SIEM from going into your SIEM, or an update was made on a device, now it logs differently or it parses differently, or a tap was set up now to be unidirectional instead of bidirectional, and because of that, the security control that you have in place is dropping everything because it requires bidirectional communication to actually assemble things and see if there's an attack. Is that still a major problem that you're seeing across not just your organization, but perhaps with your peers, that it's that communication gap and things break where they shouldn't be broken?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case that companies, especially those that are hybrid or on-prem, are going to see, is that difference between what you originally agreed to and time, and that shift over time. For us, I think there's two pieces that help prevent that. First is change management. Any changes that happen, you got to be announcing those, following process, and security needs to be part of at least the alert infrastructure for change management.
Yeah.
Once you have that, got to be honest, moving to the cloud and cloud automation eliminates a lot of that change that happens over time. When you start to do agile CI/CD processes, you start to do blue-green zones, systems don't hang around for years and have an opportunity to go through that change. And in like Amazon AWS, you can set up rules on every time a system's created, you've got the following configuration. And if it changes, you alert the infrastructure team and the security team and go fix stuff.
Talk a little bit more about Agile. You and I have spoken before, and you've brought this up, and I know you're a big fan of this approach. But what exactly is that?
So Agile is the switch from the traditional waterfall model in developing systems and applications. You develop on the side, you put everything together, you go through your testing, you go through your confirmation, and once or twice a year, you put it into production, right? In this Agile mode, its intention is to make smaller changes happen more rapidly. You hear rumors of people like Netflix or Amazon doing thousands of changes per day in their different infrastructure and application. We're nowhere near that, but we are trying to take our monolithic single application, segmenting that up into smaller, more rapidly developed and more elastic in our implementation to get changes out rapidly. The problem with the rapidly piece is you still have to have governance, especially if you're in a regulated environment, so that changes don't happen without a change process, and that everything that can happen quickly still has to have guidelines and gates to make sure that stupid doesn't happen quickly. But the end goal is to make it more responsive to the business, more responsive to the customer in a fashion that is repeatable and automated as much as possible.
Yeah. So trying to put a couple bullets here. So, NTP is working pretty darn good now as you kind of move to this cloud-based offering where you're doing several billion logs and alerts every single day. Parsing seems to be pretty good, even from physical devices, right? You're getting them in there. And there's always the odd vendor upgraded from version 7 to version 8, and now they moved this field or added these other things. That happens. That's part of life. But it doesn't seem to be as bad as it used to be. Back when SIMs were first coming out, and why do we have to tell anybody our log schema changed? What do you mean? Who cares? And then environmental drift, because of this agile approach, helps to mitigate some of the risk around there. So it sounds like, a little bit more getting that car on the racetrack, if you will, back to our initial.
For us, it's less mapping how the car is doing on the racetrack and more making sure that before that car hits the track, it's all set up properly and well-defined inside the gates. You don't have ventures off the track here.
Yeah. Well, and again, back to the the days of being on some of these, like some of the old ArcSight POCs weren't measured in like weeks or months. They're measured in quarters, sometimes years. They were long. And this isn't just an ArcSight thing. This happens for a lot of enterprise SIMs. It's just long, detailed processes. But I remember you'd build up all these really cool volumetric or temporal analysis correlation rules and anomaly detection and pattern discovery. And let's just assume all the NTP and parsing and all the environmental drift issues, they've been addressed, which they weren't, but we'll pretend they are. It's a nice facade. But now we're building up all this content. The problem that we always had back in the field in the day was, I don't know if any of this stuff is actually going to fire when the real attack happens. Because what if my IDS or IPS says, hey, I just saw an attack. Okay. And I do have an accept on my firewall to show it got through in the same time or the same time period within a second or two apart, a couple seconds. Source IP, destination IP, matching up ports. I've got all this stuff. But I'm so dependent on that stuff working under me that I don't even know what's going to happen once it actually hits the SIM. And everything has to be humming along well. What are you trying to do? Okay, now you've got everything working. What are you trying to do to get to the next step, which is, okay, it's working. Let's start getting value. Let's make sure that the correlation, the anomaly detection, and the temporal and the volumetric and the behavioral stuff and all these other things are actually functioning right.
Sure. Before we moved into the cloud in a managed data center with managed security services around that, we were not confident that what we thought should be blocked or noticed or alerted on was actually happening. That's the original driver for us taking a look at Veriden, was doing that 100% mapping of what do you think you're getting and how do you think it's going to get there and what do you think the log stream is that looks like when you're actually detecting that. That's why we went to Veriden, was to take that next level in governance and compliance and verify that what we thought we were buying was actually happening.
Yeah. And you know this better than anybody, but you run, pick a flavor, Bad Rabbits, Stuxnet, WannaCry variant 1, 2, 3, 14, whatever the latest thing is. It doesn't actually say that in almost every case when it's coming across your network. It's not like, hey guys, you're being hit by WannaCry, you're hitting by, NotPetya, something like that. It's usually some type of a little bit more arcane
V1
thing.
Alert.
Right.
Okay,
right.
What do I tie that to? Who's my
Terse,
attacker?
alphanumeric, executable, high likelihood of being hostile. What? What's that? So a lot of the times you're running this, and again, this is the problem that we are seeing a lot in SIM across the board. Kind of one of the reasons why we started Veriden and figured a SIP was a great solution. A lot of us came out of that SIM space was everything's working and you're getting it, but there's not a person that's going to look at this information, determine, okay, this is that attack, or this is what this attack looks like in my environment. So the whole idea was, well, with a SIP platform, now we can actually run the real attack safely, run it safely in our production environment. Let's see how all our products respond to that, the good and the bad, based on how they're tuned right now. It really becomes a question of tuning. because I might have the firewall tuned properly and the IPS kind of right and the DLP not at all, or some reverse combination of that. But how does this attack work with all the warts and everything that's also awesome on my network? How's it look? And I think that was one of the big pieces, because when we'd be writing all these correlation rules back in the day, we had no way to verify that it would actually show up and this is something that we could trigger. We had to base it on experience and use cases, and we did, I think, an okay job. I don't think we ever did a great job because we had no way to validate what we were doing was actually working.
Yeah, you trusted the vendor signature worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us, one of the first use cases as a financial services industry company was we tested Fin6 using Verident. So we got all our infrastructure set up, we got our actors and our directors set up, and we tested Fin6. So if we get hit with Fin6, what's it going to look like? What's our blocks? What's our detects? And what shows up in the SIEM? And that was a good first start for us because we found gaps. Not surprising there, right? But we've spent time fixing those gaps and moved on to the next one. And, you know, attack of the day. So we've spent the last couple of weeks looking at Iran-based attacks, APT-33, APT-34, blah, 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 up to APT-39, testing to make sure that our infrastructure, in the case that something turned nasty again in the geopolitical area, we're prepared. And Verident's doing a great job there.
You know, one of the things that I was really excited about when we announced that FireEye was acquiring Verident, and now we've been part of the family for several quarters. Certainly it's the product integration, things like Helix, which I think is awesome. And Verident continues to be neutral and supports ArcSight and Splunk and Elastic and Curator and everybody else under the sun, SIEM or otherwise, which is great in terms of validating those controls. But beyond the product side, I got really excited about the threat intelligence side.
Mapping that attack then back to using threat intelligence.
Back to it, right?
Actors, yeah.
Because it used to be, again, we'll talk early days of threat intel. Here's a folder of a bunch of bad IPs and domains, URLs. And then 2 minutes later, here's another folder with a bunch of, you're like, okay, I don't really have any way to operationalize this one. So it's kind of hard. Maybe I can ingest a list and there's an API and I can add this to some watch list, whatever. But then how do I personalize it? Okay, based on this IOC or based on this TTP, how's it going to react in my environment? And you rattled off a couple different Iranian-centric ATPs. Let's say one of them got in, right? How will my controls respond? And if they're known to beacon out here, there's a command and control for this. Yep. Is that being blocked? Is it being detected? And can I validate that? That's where I think the rubber meets the road. It's funny. The former one of the co-founders and over at Anomaly, Colby Dorota, a little over a year ago joined Verident as our CTO, and of course he was a champion of threat intelligence. And we integrate with Anomaly and Flashpoint and 451, a number of key threat intelligence players. But now we're part of FireEye, and of course we integrate with the FireEye intelligence. And I'm not here to push one or the other. Of course, I think FireEye offers some pretty awesome stuff in terms of threat intel. But now that you can actually test and validate not just IOCs, but TTPs, how they're working in my environment. And to your point, you brought this up when we were talking the other day, which is, hey, I just got hit by something. Give me everything you know about this, right? Tell me everything I can. And how has that kind of morphed your process operationally in terms of, you know, what are the steps we take when something occurs?
Yeah, for us, again, a small financial services, we have outsourced our tier one, coincidentally, to the FireEye managed defense.
Are you
side.
Considered a small financial services? Are you in that kind? I guess there's some
mid.
giants.
How about mid?
Okay, I'll buy mid.
We're not Citi, we're not Visa, we're mid. We've outsourced tier one to FireEye managed defense. If there's something that happens that should be taken a look at in more detail, I've got a small team that does tier two, incident response, investigation, that type of thing. But if it turns into an incident where we've got a nation state attack or we've got targeted attacks that make it through our huge security stack and all the tools and solutions we have in place, then we're going to go to a tier three outsourced incident response team to help us understand the real details in the tools that we have and what's going on. And for us, we have a retainer with Mandiant. So again, multiple different FireEye solutions in place. When the integration, you mentioned this, when the integration between Verident and FireEye hit, that helped us hugely, because now we've got tools that can test and integrate well with the FireEye suite of products that we have in place.
Yeah. No, I love that multidimensional approach. And to be honest, I think that's where the industry is going. We always talk about the talent gap and everything else, but even if you have a talented staff of incident responders, how often are they responding to things, and how large is what's the breadth and depth of what they're experiencing, juxtaposed to the Mandiant side, the FireEye services side, right, which is doing this day in, day out with the worst players out there. I've been very impressed. I knew a lot of these folks before the acquisition, and of course now we're doing a lot with them as it relates to purple teaming and other types of integration. But I think it's the way everyone's going to have to go. I think you're going to have some type of external firm, even if you have a team of ninjas. It just makes sense to at least augment with a group like this that has access to this global perspective, all the threat intelligence as well, because they're both receivers of that, and they also provide input for threat intelligence that gets trickled back to the customer. So it's really a nice combination of things to pull those together.
Yeah, for us, we are not a hugely attacked type of company, but after we finished our cloud migration to move everything to Amazon, we noticed something abnormal. We were sending a lot of traffic to a country in the Middle East. And I don't know about you, but that's panic time.
Yeah.
Turns out we did bring Mandiant in to take a look and determine if there were any compromises in the infrastructure or anything abnormal. But in the end, it was our telephonic infrastructure misconfigured and sending data to the address range associated with that country, because the phone company chose that as their internal IPs. Believe it or not.
Okay.
So that configuration leaked to our phones, and our phones were talking to the Middle East.
Yeah. Strange, but better than what it could have been.
Yes.
We were working with a customer that for their internal IP address range, I don't know why they did this, they used a publicly available range that actually belonged to another organization. I have no idea why they didn't use
crazy.
10net or 192.168.
20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's because through acquisition, and then we absorbed that company and somebody just forgot about that happened. And for some reason they thought it was cool to be the same address range, but stuff like that does pop up. But that's an interesting one, right? And what I think is really, really cool about sort of bringing SIP into the equation with your security controls and your threat intelligences. Now you can start running all these tests, right? All these validations on your controls. But you can also start validating, how do our people respond to this, right? And is the process that we had in place pre-cloud, or when we were basing our decisions on these security tools that are no longer in place or have been upgraded or changed out, are they still working? And usually the answer is there's stuff that's broken, right? And we have to relearn, we have to retrain, we have to change processes. Was that part of the growing pains or the maturation, if you will?
Yeah, for us, especially after migrating all of our infrastructure over to AWS, is making sure that what we thought was happening and should happen actually did happen. In terms of still, even the security stack and blocking and tackling, all the way through the logging infrastructure, making sure all the logs end up in the right place. So that was definitely important for us as we made a huge infrastructure change.
Yeah, yeah. And did that take place over months, quarters, over a year?
The migration?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we spent 2 years working with our regulatory bodies to make sure they felt comfortable with it. We spent a year in the process with 9 months planning and 3 months executing to move over all of our workloads, all of our infrastructure throughout the process. Sorry about that.
That's right.
Sorry.
That's all right. Live TV. No, it's and I like how you played that out. You said, look, we planned for 9 and we executed over 3. It's usually the exact opposite, but you've been to this rodeo before, so I know.
It was a huge hockey stick. We tried non-prod, one workload, failed. Tried it again, failed. tried it again, succeeded, and then everything let loose and we got everything done rapidly.
Yeah. How critical is it with, and it's kind of a loaded question because at 2 billion events a day, I'm kind of know what you're going to say, but how critical is automation in sort of this program?
Automation is hugely critical. You can't have that much happening behind the scenes and have a team to look at that. You think back to the old DoD days where every single top secret system generated a log and then somebody had to review it.
Yeah.
That doesn't apply these days. And there's so many logs now that you get that you can't look at everything, besides the fact that a lot of them are contributing context to what's going on, not necessarily just the serious logs show up. So it takes a huge infrastructure behind the scenes to take all that in, evaluate it, and really point out here's what you need to look at events.
You know, you said something really key there, because sometimes when you're getting these crazy logs that don't really say anything, like there was a PAX executable, terse alphanumeric, high likelihood, whatever. And then you see another log that says cross-site scripting. Oh, well, I know what that is. I know that's a bad thing. I'll just go ahead and drill down into that. And then later on, you find out it's not really what it is. It wasn't a cross-site scripting attack at all. It's just the way this specific web-based application is configured. It picks up as a cross-site scripting through this other, management tool or something like that. You see this stuff all the time. Like,
false positives.
Yeah, you get a lot of these false positives that they're completely benign, and until you see them, you don't know how to get rid of them. So that's what people focus on. What I always thought was cool with SIP is I always liked the idea that you could execute these attacks ad hoc and do these validations. But the fact that you can automate it and say, look, I'm going to run 1,000 tests or 1,000 attacks every single day in perpetuity. And they should always return this, and this. So essentially they should always be green. Now, if this one green thing turns red, I can manage that by exception now, right? I can say, okay, this was blocking, or this was alerting, or this was correlating, and now it stopped. So now I say, okay, I've got 2 billion events a day happening, but now I've got the thing that actually was working has stopped. Nobody called me up and told me it stopped. I didn't get an update from this team. But now I have an automated tool in the back end to sort of tell me, go focus on this and manage it by exception.
Yeah, the thing that I like about Verid in that particular case is you're using PCAPs of real attack traffic. Yeah. It's not fantasy, I'm going to try and do a scan and see what happens. It's real attacks going between actor and director, or actor and actor. Yeah. I love that perspective. It's real stuff. You get real logs, you get real attack scenarios in your tools.
Yeah. Yeah, and I probably one of my favorite parts about it. I guess I have a lot of favorite parts, but it's an open content platform, so you can get content from us and PCAPs and malware. You can write your own stuff, PowerShell, Python, what have you, shell scripts. You can pull PCAPs down from publicly available databases like malware traffic analysis. Maybe have your own packet capture solutions. You can ingest those as well. It's not as simple as just like a TCP replay, right? Once you get them, nice thing about Verid is actually makes it routable. It's actually the bi-directional communication between the two. If A happens, then B responds, then C, then D. It's not just push the traffic. But back to our other conversation was threat intelligence, right? And pulling stuff in from your ISACs. Obviously, you guys work with the FSISAC and others. Do you find the content that you're getting, maybe we'll come back to threat intel a little bit, but the content you're getting from FSISACs and maybe some of the other ISACs that you work for, is that stuff that you can actually operationalize and execute on, or maybe you're already doing it? Is that providing that kind of real hands-on keyboard value?
So there's probably 2 or 3 different answers to that. The first is from an IOC perspective. IOCs are shared daily. If you want to manually take out of FSISAC communications and put those in, that's great. They have automated solutions to share the IOCs. There have been, though, over the years on attacks that look like they were targeting financial services that shared PCAP models. So we have examples of other banks sharing an attack and the PCAPs. So in that particular case, we could have taken those PCAPs and put them into Verid and run the test on ourselves. I think that's moving up a level and starting to use the MITRE attack framework to talk about the different stages and raising a little bit in the information sharing, less down at the bit level these days, because we have tools in place that can execute against those known attacks these days. It's less about customizing and developing your own attack detection platforms, and it's more about using the tools and talking about the actors and the threats and how that's applying to us.
Yeah. So you mentioned MITRE ATT&CK. Are you using a lot of MITRE ATT&CK? Are you looking at NIST and OWASP and sort of the whole bag of them, or is there some area where you're focusing more on?
So from us, we're definitely interested in the MITRE ATT&CK framework as a way to make sure that we're getting what we want out of our tools. And the fact that Veridin started working with that very early on has been a significant win for us. That's our primary driver in the attack framework.
Yeah, it's, you know, NIST and OWASP, and there's been a lot of these things for a long time. I really like the way MITRE has done theirs, and I like how the focus of this particular framework is post-compromise. We're assuming that something bad's already happened, then now what, right? And it goes to that next level. And I think that's a really powerful way of approaching it, especially on the endpoint stuff, which is can be a little bit more archaic. You know, we're used to really fine-tuning network security controls and maybe even cloud or email security controls. But when it came to endpoint, it's kind of, we installed it and we update it and it tells us when something breaks, and it kind of stops there. But there's actually a lot more tuning you can do now than you used to be able to do.
Yeah, the one thing that I'm struggling with these days is you've got 20 years of AV experience with signature base, and I really don't care about that these days. I have N-1 on the server OS versions. I don't care about the old stuff anymore. I don't care about the number of signatures.
Yeah.
So all of those different tools that are in place today, signature base is not driving me. It's the latest versions of threat actors and the attack scenarios they do. And again, that goes back into how do you map that into the MITRE ATT&CK framework, making sure that the recent stuff is covered. I don't really care about the old stuff anymore.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's easy to get hung up on all the weight of what came before, right?
Yeah.
That actually brings up a good question in terms of patch management. Has that gotten easier, harder, stayed the same with your migration to the cloud? Have you had to adjust?
Well, when we did the migration, we got rid of any of those physical boxes, those special snowflakes that can't be patched.
Yeah.
Nope, that doesn't happen anymore. You go in and you're part of the infrastructure. You've got a golden AMI applied. You've got well-known patching processes that happen. For us, I think our number of vulnerabilities at the OS level has significantly dropped.
Oh, yeah.
We still have some of those application-related vulnerabilities that we have to deal with, but OS-wise, the cloud infrastructure piece is for us significant because we're putting processes around the bubble of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, it was a whole bunch of bubbles that you couldn't really ever manage in that process.
So just the act of having a compliant gold standard or standards. So it's like compliance by reason or force. I like those. Like, we can't put your special snowflake in there. It doesn't work that way. I'd love to, but I can't. No, that's awesome.
And if it doesn't work, go to a cloud SaaS application.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Right. So if you had to pick like 2 or 3 big lessons learned from a security perspective as it relates to the cloud migration, you know, what are they? What would you kind of pass on?
Visibility is massively improved for us. We thought we were getting all the logs. We thought we were seeing as much as we could, transparency in the network. We had some packet captures. We had taps here and there. But when we moved to the cloud, by default, the availability of CloudWatch, CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, the transparency is immensely more giving here in this environment. We have so much more information. In the process, when we moved all the server infrastructure over, so it was a process for us of lift and shift. So we moved servers from one data center to Amazon. That gave us an opportunity to make sure that every single server and virtual desktop infrastructure system had endpoint protection, had antivirus, was configured properly, and is part of the patching system. So that gave us a huge improvement in making sure that everything was covered from a security perspective and in our stack. Those are probably the two big things that we learned from our side in moving to the cloud was visibility and consistent infrastructure.
And how does that rise up? So we've talked a lot about the sort of the bits and bytes of this and how that operationally it makes things more efficient, more effective. You've got threat intelligence, you've got the Mandiant services, you've got Verident SIP and the Amazon cloud. You've got a lot of the functional pieces working. When it starts going into the executive team and the board and people
Sure.
that are non-technical, non-security, are you able to, I guess, move the business needle forward more efficiently, more effectively?
Yeah, so we do measure things in a bunch of different ways. CIS top 20, we've improved in some of the categories there. Inventory management, no physical boxes where you lose inventory. Amazon, click a button, you get a list of inventory, as an example. So CIS top 20, compliance improved. The other is that list of benchmarks or metrics that you give your board. How many vulnerabilities do you have? How many exceptions do you have? How many incidents have you had? We've definitely seen an improvement in those metrics as we've moved to the cloud as well.
Are they asking for it more as well? Or is it about the same?
No, I don't see that they're asking more for it because we've gone through a very governed process in moving our stuff to the cloud. So there's less, they're not uncomfortable with doing all of that. They definitely feel comfortable in how we've approached that, how we've managed that transition. For example, I know companies that have hundreds of accounts in Amazon that they learn of new ones every day because they don't have a strong vendor management process or governance around it. That's not the case for us. We don't allow any rogue accounts, for example. In our particular environment, we went through that governance process and I think worked very strongly with our regulators. So our board feels comfortable in where we're at there.
Yeah. Do you have to work relatively closely with the audit committee and committees like that within the board?
Oh, yes. Audit and compliance were strong participants in that process. So as we moved workloads into Amazon, we had immediate compliance checks and assessments and evidence providing to make sure that we were doing it right from the very beginning. We spent a lot of time working on all our unified control framework that we were using to make sure that the controls mapped into the cloud. We came up with a whole bunch of new cloud controls, but in the end, they just were already there. We just had to reuse the existing controls and change the evidence gathering portion of that. Instead of a spreadsheet from the system that's running the routers, we now have a click button in Amazon to do a list of all the VPC routes.
Yeah.
Easy scenarios like that.
That's nice. That's nice. And does audit have direct access to some of the Verident SIP reporting, or is that something that you pull certain parts out for them?
Not yet. We do share, but they don't have direct access. That is an interesting question, and I think that depends on company culture and maturity.
Yeah.
And we're not there yet.
I was talking with a CISO from a large healthcare organization that uses our solution. We were talking about their audit committee, and his suggestion to me to pass on to any customers was, look, let the security team have Verident SIP for at least a few quarters, because the audit team is going to look at a security instrumentation platform as a vulnerability scanner or a automated pen test tool or something like that, unless you spend a lot of time educating them on exactly what it is. It's a ongoing, configuration, validation, making sure things stay working, things like that. And they'll say, hey, look how ugly the baby is. To which you're saying, well, of course the baby's ugly because we've never had a chance to validate that it was cute, right? There's a lot of stuff we need to fix. Oh, you guys are horribly behind. There's, and it just becomes this big political nightmare. And he says, keep them away for a few quarters.
Yeah, and well, actually, one of the reasons why, again, we took a look at Verident was audit had heard this term called purple teaming. And so, the concept of attack and, red team, blue team concept here in Verident really drove us into, let's find a solution that can help them understand our options in purple teaming. And so that's kind of our use case right now is making sure that we cover both the red side and the blue side.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. We have another podcast with Evan Pena. And Evan runs the, amongst a number of things, but some of the purple teaming initiatives for FireEye. And he's a longtime Mandiant guy, did a lot of red teaming and pen testing and some more advanced work as well, especially for some of our government agencies and more sensitive customers. So some really, really cool stuff. I like the way where purple teaming is going. I like the maturity model there. I still remember the days where you'd run a pen test and you create a report and here's all the issues and you kick it over to the blue team or, the SOC operator folks. And they'd say, okay, we'll get to this when we have time. And then they never have time. And you come back next quarter and 6 months or a year. Same fine, you just change the date. And they say, yeah, we know about this. We just don't have time to get to it. Right. And it just, and we thought that was a good approach. And I'm not saying everybody approached it that way, but you saw a lot of that in the space. And to say it wasn't is being disingenuous. There was a lot of that going on. So it's like, here's a bunch of problems, go fix them. We don't have time. Come back next year and tell us what the problems are again. Maybe some of these get fixed just by mistake. We just really never made progress. So purple teaming from that perspective, I think makes great sense. But it's like cloud migration. Yeah, it makes sense. But there's a lot of details in there, right? There's that hockey stick that you talked about.
Yeah, definitely. We saw what you're talking about is like going from Windows XP to Windows 10. It's still Windows on a desktop, but what you fixed is immense there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Steve, any other things that you want to mention before I let you go?
No, we're in the end, we're happy with the integration between FireEye and Veridin. Looking forward to continuing to test our environment, make sure what we think is working, and being successful there. As we move to the cloud, that was definitely a lot of unknown unknowns, and it's helping us verify that the security infrastructure is in place, that the stack is proficient, and that we're getting, in the end, all the logs that we need to get.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. As always, buddy, it's always great having you on the call, Steve.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thanks.
All right, man. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, see ya.